Are you someone who can never keep up with a good change you make in your life? You find out that some action is a good idea. Say, you read that getting sun every day is good for you. They tell you that it will have all types of wonderful effects on you. And so you decide to do it every day. The first day, you do it cheerfully, propelled by the novelty and the hope. It's fine. Maybe it had some effect. The second day, the novelty is decreased and the sensation that this takes effort starts to kick in. You persist. After all, what habit bears fruits the second day? We need to give it some time. The third day, that scale continues to turn against you. The novelty decreases, you do not see any clear reward, and the effort seems to be higher, perhaps because the action is hard in itself. You need to wake up at the same time, you need to get dressed to go outside, or because it becomes hard to overcome that sensation of pointlessness. Why even bother? Every day, doing the routine becomes harder. You start to have feelings of dejection, frustrated hopes, even anger. Why doesn't anything seem to work for you? This should be so simple. It seems so pleasant. They told you it has so many benefits, but it does nothing for you. Maybe you should keep it up longer, but you don't because you run out of inner resources to keep trying, and so you feel the doubt creeping in. It's my fault because I can't keep things up. I'm lazy, I'm undisciplined, I'm a fuck-up. You do this with enough things and you start to build an identity. You start to believe that you are lazy, undisciplined, and a fuck-up. Many of us try and try and try, constantly attempting some new change in life, still hoping. But some of us have given up. What is the point of starting anything if it will fizzle? Why try to improve? It will end up in disappointment anyway. In this video, I will explain why this happens so that we may have a hope of fixing it. You probably know that ADHD is connected to misregulation of dopamine. You know that dopamine is the neurotransmitter that makes us act, that if you have low dopamine, you will not be able to do anything. And sure, this is the reason why pumping yourself up to do things is so hard. But that is not the reason why you cannot establish good habits. The reason you cannot establish good habits, the reason why you cannot keep up with any new action that is good for you is because your reward system is faulty. Your reward system simply does not fire up enough, so you do not get rewarded like a neurotypical person does. We need to understand exactly what is going on. This will allow us to stop building that bad identity that we are inherently lazy, that we lack fortitude, or that we have no willpower. We are none of these things. We simply have a faulty wiring. It is not a moral failure, and we need to work with that knowledge. We need to leverage that knowledge. Changing is not easy. Establishing changes is very challenging for us. However, if we understand what is against us, we might just have a chance. If we don't understand it and keep attempting things randomly, we will keep failing and we will keep reinforcing our bad self-perception. We will end up jaded and hopeless. I know many of us are already in that state. Let's figure out how to get out of it. Everyone knows that the main problems of ADHD have to do with a lack of dopamine. It is not that we do not produce adequate dopamine, we do. In fact, if you produced less dopamine, you would have movement problems, like in Parkinson's disease. That is a condition where the person produces less dopamine than they should. Since dopamine regulates all movement, you would end up having problems with your motor skills. The problem with ADHD happens after production. It is in how the dopamine is released, how it's transported, and how it's received. You have enough dopamine to regulate fine motor skills. You can control your limbs. Well, sort of, because we do tend to bump into things, don't we? I think we should have random bruises we have no explanation for as an official criteria of ADHD diagnosis. But anyway, one of the main issues is that less dopamine is available for tasks we need to do, and the dopamine that is available gets absorbed too quickly. This is why we lack the motivation to do stuff, and why when we do get the motivation to act, we lack the motivation to stop. So we oscillate between states of scatteredness and lack of action and states of overwork, where the overwork here may be on your actual work, but it could just be overwork on a video game. The point is, we oscillate between distraction, which is when we want to do stuff, but we can't decide, we can't initiate, and if we do, we can't focus and keep it up. Then a second state of hyperfocus, where we work incessantly, hardly stop to use the restroom or eat, and a third state, which I will call the collapse state, which is when hyperfocus turns into an exhaustion that is so profound that you don't even have the will to do anything. You simply exist as a vegetable. But your mind still finds a way to berate you for being like this. You are probably familiar with this cycle, and depending on your tendency to more distraction or more hyperfocus, you get put into the inattentive ADHD box or the hyperactive ADHD box. This cycle is largely explained by the level of dopamine, which is why medication tends to help quite a bit with those problems, especially with the distraction state. Increasing the level of dopamine with stimulants can increase the baseline so that you can move, you can initiate action, you can maintain action, and your prefrontal cortex can block distractions. That's why stimulants are so successful as a first-line treatment of ADHD. However, we don't just have a problem with the level of dopamine. We have a problem with the regulation of dopamine. How dopamine is released, transported, and absorbed, when it is released, transported, and absorbed, and how much is released, transported, and absorbed. Your body is not supposed to release dopamine in stable amounts throughout the day. It is supposed to regulate increases and decreases as needed. You should have little bursts of dopamine here and there. And these bursts of dopamine are exactly what is needed to establish changes in life. That is what we're missing, you see? That is the piece that makes it so hard for us to change our habits and routines. Now, don't get me wrong. Study after study has shown that the brain systems that control our automatic behaviors, the habit circuits in the basal ganglia, are not affected by ADHD. People with ADHD can have habits. You probably have some habits, probably you have some bad habits and some good habits as well. The issue here is not whether you can have habits. You certainly can. The issue is how to change your habits. So, how do we change our actions? How do we establish new habits? Say you want to go out in the sun every morning. At first, you need to have some willpower to do it. You have to wake up in the morning, get dressed depending on the weather, go out, and then stay that time outside, which means you either need to walk or exercise or something. All of this requires something of you, some inner resource to accomplish. It requires more of people with ADHD than of neurotypical people because we have less available dopamine, so doing all this is harder for us. That's fine, we will use our willpower and we will overcome. Oh, but here's the catch. Not only is this easier to do for neurotypicals, they also get rewarded more. Yes, the reward part of the equation is the real killer. We have crazy willpower. We have been training our willpower our whole lives. We don't have less willpower than neurotypicals. We have way more willpower than neurotypicals. We just have to exhaust it with stupid things like getting out of bed, getting dressed, and going out in the sun. But we do have willpower, and we sometimes apply it to things like getting sun exposure every morning. Fine, we use our inner resources and accomplish that. Then, what do you think happens to neurotypical people? They get an immediate reward. Yes, they actually do. Their system not only helps them get out in the sun, but then when they do, it gives them a further spike of dopamine, something that goes above baseline when they accomplish the task. If the task is positive, they get a reward. It's as if they have a little angel in their shoulder that gives them a star every time they do something they should be doing, something that is good for them, and it turns out fine. This means that whenever neurotypicals do the thing, whatever they want to improve, they get a little spike of reward that says, well done, keep it up. And if it just so happens that the thing they did has any good aspect that can be noticed, that spike goes further up. Say going out in the sun is pleasant. They get a higher bump to go with it. It's as if their physiology says, wow, Not only is this good for you, it is also kind of nice. There you go, 2 stars for you. They exercise, they get the dopamine bump for keeping up the effort. And then when they get some of the good hormones from exercise, they get the dopamine bump of that reward. This is not something I'm making up. Dopamine is literally the chemical of habit formation. The part of the brain that keeps up the habits is the basal ganglia, particularly the dorsolateral striatum, which is not affected by ADHD. But to form the habit, you need dopamine, which is heavily affected by ADHD. You need dopamine not only to keep repeating the action long enough, but even more importantly, to get the reward that reinforces the action and transforms it into a habit. And I mean it when I say that the reward piece is more important, because you can overcome the issue of repetition. You can force yourself to do something over and over, even though you do not like to do it. You can repeat an action even if you have ADHD. It will be harder to keep it up, but it is possible. But you do not get rewarded by your brain, and there is nothing we can do about it. So nothing in your system is saying, "Good job, that is a good action, keep it up." Nobody is tracking if something is inherently nice and then reinforcing, "Yes, do more of this." Those spikes of dopamine, once you do something because you felt good for any reason at all, those spikes say to your brain, "This is an action worth repeating. Next time, let's do it again." We don't get that. So, why would we do the action again? We do it again because our prefrontal cortex tells us to. We, people with ADHD, do it again because we must, because it is good for you. We do it on the back of willpower, because we must try again tomorrow. Meanwhile, tomorrow, your neurotypical friends will do it again because their brain anticipates that dopamine spike. Their brain is telling them, when we do this, we feel well, so go do it. How does their brain know they will feel well? Because they got a dopamine spike at the end of that activity the day before, sometimes during the activity. You see the problem here? Say we are completely mindful and we go out in the sun and we enjoy it. If we don't have the dopamine spike that reinforces the action, the next day we can tell ourselves, "Go out, you will feel better." But it's not our body telling ourselves. It's not any of the automatic systems telling us that. It is our prefrontal cortex saying that. That's much less powerful. This is the difference between eating your vegetables because your mother told you it is good for you and eating your vegetables because you like them, because something in you feels inherently good when you eat the vegetables and reminds you every time you make a good choice, so you anticipate in your body that eating the vegetables will feel good. That's the job of dopamine. Feeling good is serotonin. Anticipating feeling good is dopamine. We can go out in the sun and feel good while we are there, but without the dopamine spike to signal that this is an activity worth repeating, we will not anticipate feeling good tomorrow. We may have to remind ourselves, which requires willpower, memory, planning, etc. Scientists have studied this process for decades, and the picture is consistent across brain imaging, electrophysiology, and animal research. When an action produces a better outcome than expected, dopamine neurons in a region deep in the midbrain called the ventral tegmental area fire a short burst of activity. That burst releases dopamine into the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex, which are the areas that help you evaluate options and make choices. This release of dopamine marks the event as significant and strengthens the connection between the cue, the action, and the reward. Over time, those strengthened pathways make the brain release dopamine earlier, in anticipation, which is what drives motivation and habit formation. Brain image and genetic studies of people with ADHD show that this dopamine pulse is weaker and shorter-lived. The brain still produces normal dopamine overall, but it clears it too quickly, or the receptors don't pick it up as strongly. So the reinforcement signal that should mark an action as good, do it again, is very faint. You can repeat the action 100 times, but it never gets that little internal confirmation that that's a good action to repeat. That is the catch. That is why when we find that there is something we should do, like sleep on time or exercise, or go out in the sun, or call a friend, or make the bed, or eat healthy food, or eat our meals at regular times, or keep stable working hours, or drink our water, or take electrolytes, or take the supplement, or do the stretch, and who knows what else that we should be doing, we decide, tomorrow I start. Then we keep it up for a week at most, and then we abandon it and say that it did not work for us. Why? Because every day as the novelty wears off, the cost of the action becomes higher and higher for us. We already lack dopamine to engage in the act, so we spend willpower to accomplish the act, and then we do not get rewarded when we do accomplish the act. Every day our situation gets harder because it takes more and more inner resources to get us to do the thing. Meanwhile, the reward remains the same, nearly zero. And our mind starts to try to protect us from doing useless things. The mind is very invested in us not doing useless things. So it starts producing thoughts like, it isn't worth it. This is never going to work. Why even try? This is too hard. It's better to just give up, and so on, which makes things even harder. Meanwhile, for the neurotypical person, the action becomes easier and easier because they don't have as much cost to do it to begin, and then they get more and more rewarded every time. After 1 week, you give up completely, and they decide that it wasn't so bad, and why don't I just keep it up another week? And this is why they end up with a habit, and you end up with a disappointment. That is the problem we have, and in my opinion, this is actually the most serious problem of ADHD. You can solve inaction and distraction with stimulants. You can't solve the lack of reward issue because this is not about the level of dopamine. Throwing more dopamine at the system won't help this. You would need to create a dopamine spike at the right time, and stimulants don't do that. They just raise the general level. And because of this issue, we cannot change to improve our lives. And not only do we not change, but because of the multiple failures, we also end up thinking badly of ourselves and building a negative identity. I think this is the most serious problem of ADHD. And although quite a bit is known about this, it is nowhere nearly as discussed nor properly acknowledged by doctors, and the solutions normally offered are kind of ridiculous. So let's talk about solutions. How do you change when you have ADHD? That's what I'll discuss in my next video. I hope to see you there.